And we are now officially doing that. So awesome, you guys. Let me go ahead and bring this up for you so we can all look at the same thing together here. I'm going to slide that up and bring your faces over here so I can see you. Boy, this feels reminiscent of long days of teaching on Zoom back in COVID, but here we are. Okay. All right, you guys. Well, so good morning to you. Just a reminder, we are going to record this. So if you got questions, feel free to ask. If you are brave enough to want to ask them in a public setting, feel free to jump on and you can unmute. If you would rather put them in the chat, I got the chat running here too. So you can private message me or do a full one. It doesn't matter to me, but ultimately we're just trying to bring some clarity around what's going on. So many of you I know have attended individual trainings. Many of you have gone to webinars and watched YouTube videos, done stuff at the associations, listened to me or Katie or all sorts of us kind of talking here. So there is a lot of information, and while it is mostly all accurate, some of it I'm learning is not. And so today we want to try to bring some clarity to what we're doing and also what we are looking for as recommendations from the company perspective as well. So leadership, we've spent a lot of time talking about these. What are we going to do and everything that's coming into it. So we will try to bring as much clarity as we can and some best practices at the tail end of this. Plan that this will roughly take us, I'm going to guess, somewhere about 90 minutes. That seems to be how long it takes to get through everything by the time we do questions and scenarios and answers and everything else too. So feel free to jump in. Again, interrupt me at any time. This is your meeting. Conversations are always better. So feel free to jump in. Or again, if you're like, I don't want to do that, you can message me or private message me as well. And we can kind of go from there. So that's the start of how we are. And I'm going to keep just letting people in the room as they keep popping up. So here we go. The big things we want to talk about are all the form changes that are happening. So this is a full list of everything that has changed in our forms for 2024. When we talk about, what does it look like and how do we handle this and all these other fun kind of things, it's important to know that we have some basic forms. And when we talk about, I really jumped forward here. There we go. So when we talk about the commercial forms in this space, there's a little bit less involved, right? So we're going to talk about listing contracts. We're going to talk about the financing addendum and all these things. Some of these we're not going to go over today just because they're not as impactful, right? So if you do a lot of commercial, then you're going to want to look at the forms and you can call me or anybody. We can have those conversations. If you are stuck, you can always reach out, and that's what we're here for. So new forms, as we start talking about the space here, right? So there is the new form, which is the addendum/amendment. It's a one-pager. You check it. Remember, addendums is when you're adding to a non-executed contract. An amendment is when we're changing an executed contract that talks specifically about seller concessions. Okay. We also have an addendum to lease agreements about utility bills. If you, any of you have rentals or are advising people on it, this is a form that we can use when we have one meter that services multiple units and how we handle some of that. The big one we'll spend some time on today, of course, is this cooperating broker compensation agreement. And then there is a new state statute that came out on contract for deed people when you're selling on a contract for deed, and some important information you need to know there. So these are the new forms that we will talk about. As I said, the commercial forms, small changes to the listing contract and buyer rep, again, due to the settlement information that is coming in. We have our financing addendum, a couple tweaks there. PA's got a couple small tweaks, primarily around chronic wasting disease, and then the purchase agreement for vacant land also has some similar things. I should point out that the forms we're going to primarily address today will be the Minnesota side. If you are licensed with our North Dakota team, we will have a conversation about what those look like in the coming days here. We'll get something scheduled on what that looks like, but the sentiment of what we're going to talk about today is relatively the same. So the information and understanding should be relatively transitory. So residential forms, we of course have our addendum or amendment to the listing contract, the buyer rep and the facilitation agreement. That's that new form that we're talking about. And then we have our PA addendum, contract for deed, referencing the new laws around investor sellers. Our buyer rep are exclusive and non-exclusive, a couple things to accommodate the recent changes there with the settlement. We have a couple updates to the disclosure documents. Our facilitator here, again, similar terms around payment and compensation. Our listing contracts to sell and to lease are both updated. And then, of course, residential, new construction, vacant land PAs all got updated because we all have fun new things we get to work through. So that's the high level, I guess, on the forms of what we're looking at inside of this space. So. All right, first thing, let's talk through some of the less impactful stuff that may be meaningful and may not be. Special notices and assessments here. This has been a consolidated clause that is put on the disclosures, and it's a little bit expanded, giving you a little bit more room. Again, questions. So this is basically just saying, hey, the following questions are to be answered to the best of the seller's knowledge. The seller has or has not received notice regarding any HOA, city, township, county, you name it, any proposed, ongoing, or completed improvement projects from any assessing authorities. So you got a couple of options there. The cost of which may be assessed, is currently assessed, or may be assessed against the property. And so these are the spaces in which you get a chance to kind of work through really anything that's going on. This one really came up similar to the change on the purchase agreement when it talks about non-payable assessments, because the city of Rochester is where we ended up getting this issue. And the city of Rochester decided to not allow assessments to be prepaid. The reason they did not allow assessments to be prepaid is because the city was taking a stance that said, hey, this is revenue, this is interest income that we are anticipating. But as you and I know, oftentimes when we transition property, the assessments will get paid. And so when we talk about that, that's where all of a sudden the city of Rochester was losing out on projected revenue that they had for themselves, and they didn't have the opportunity to recover that because the assessments were getting paid off. So all of a sudden, City of Rochester said, you know what, we're just going to make them non-payable. There's essentially it's a prepayment penalty that doesn't exist. The penalty is you don't get to prepay. And so as a result of that, some sellers were not disclosing special assessments because they didn't know about it, right? Similar to, I shared with a team down here in Alec and Douglas and Pope County, we have an assessment for what we call the incinerator, right? Pope Douglas Solid Waste Management. It is classified as an assessment, but it's in perpetuity. It just continues to exist. So it's not really an assessment by definition, but that's a different story. And we do the same thing. Many people here don't disclose that, well, there's this assessment, because it's assumed that if you're buying a property in the market, you're going to know that that $99 fee is on there. And so this is a way for us to make sure that everybody is indicating that, yes, there is an assessment and what that looks like. So for people who sell in certain counties, you may have something very similar. And the answer should be, yes, you have received notice of ongoing special assessments, which could be a non-payable, it could be an incinerator charge, it could be anything from the HOA that's coming down the pike, anything that may be in a proposed, ongoing, or completed status. So that's the first one. A little less impactful, maybe more background than you wanted, but that's why it's here in that space. So any questions on this before I move on? I'm just going to kind of try to leave it as fluid as we can today. You can raise your hand, come off mute, whatever you want to do. Seeing none, I'm going to move on. It's not that I can't come back. So if I'm confusing, please let me know. Other defects, there was a commonality on the forms team that said, hey, we're running out of room. Sellers would have to add additional pages in order to write certain things. And I appreciate that they actually gave you the definition here too. Other defects, material facts, or additional comments that the seller would like to disclose. Of course, the seller can always add, right? They can continue to add to disclosures as much as they want. But the thing that I really appreciate here again is, are there any other material facts that could, and this is the definition, if you don't know what a material fact is, it is anything that could adversely or significantly affect an ordinary buyer's use or enjoyment of the property or any intended use of the property. If the answer is yes or no, then they have a full box to explain. Pretty simple, but it's still a really nice spot in order to allow, and it's expanded. It's about double the size that it was on the last round of forms. Cemetery Act, following questions. Again, Minnesota statute. This is something that's been around. We just didn't have it in our forms, so it's added. In the event that you have anything around, it is illegal to molest, which I feel is a weird word, but molest of human remains, burials, or cemeteries. And so if you knowingly destroy something, you do have ramifications. The only one that I'm really aware of is there was a case in the middle of the state where somebody went to excavate for a basement and they found an old Indian burial ground. And then next thing you know, that not a house was not allowed to be built because now the sellers who did not, or the owners of the property did not have knowledge that there were any human remains there. And it was a whole thing. And that's where that landed. So this is just a standard disclosure. Most people are going to say no, but if great grandma Ruby is buried on the back 40 and you know that, we have to disclose that, right? That is something we have to disclose. Now, the thing I do appreciate is it says human remains. That is the statute language. So if Bucky, your puppy, was buried, or Flipper, your fish, was buried because you had a ceremony as a family on the property, the seller does not have to disclose any animal things, just the side of human remains. So that is where that comes into play. Financing clause. So this is on the purchase agreement. This is a really nice spot where we just gave a little bit of clarity, right? Oftentimes, if you remember in the financing section, there's two options when we talk about the financing contingency. The first one is at any time, basically in the agreement, the buyer can secure financing. The second one says that they will have it secured by a specific date. This is in regards to the second option, where we were just bringing a little bit of clarity around what that means. So upon the written statement in this purchase agreement does not close on the stated closing date for any reason relating to financing, including but not limited to interest rate or discount points, the seller may at their option declare this purchase agreement canceled, blah, 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 directing all earnest money paid to and to be forfeited to the seller. What was happening in this situation is we were getting buyers these days who home values are up, interest rates are up, people are buying at the top of their DTI schedule, right? The most that they're allowed to. And what was happening is we were getting people who, the points would move just so enough, even if it's an eighth of a point, it would move and then come to closing, they'd get the CD, and next thing you know, their DTI doesn't support the purchase price anymore. They no longer qualify for that loan because people are that tight to it. In the event that that happened, we were getting sellers who were coming back and saying, well, no, we should keep this. It's not our fault, right? We had a written statement by a specific date, life is good. And so in that space, they said, we need to keep this as liquidated damages. Our attorneys agreed and just brought some more clarity to that section in that space. So, normally we're going to see if you're representing a buyer, you want to select option 1 on that form that just says, hey, at any time, right, they can work through this and secure financing. If you're the seller, you want option 2 because you want to know by a specific date when that buyer has their financing secured. So that's just a little bit of clarity on that particular space there. I'm seeing no questions, so I'm just going to kind of keep moving, right? DVA funding fee, not otherwise waived. So with changes to the VA programming and underwriting, there have been cases in which, depending upon how a vet's DD-214 form states their discharge code from their service, that DD-214 will have a discharge code. If you ever work with VA people, you just need to say, hey, I need your DD-214. We're going to need it if you're utilizing VA funding, so make sure you have it. That discharge code, depending upon where they are in the system, sometimes the funding fee is 0, sometimes it's waived, sometimes it's not. It's kind of across the board. So this just brought some clarity because we were getting questions that says, well, if it's waived, what do we do? And so this basically just says, adding the not otherwise waived functionality. So if it's waived, we still recommend, putting zeros and filling it out. However, if it is not otherwise waived, then you can fill out the 144 and 145 accordingly. So just a little bit of clarity piece on this one as well. All right, PA. So this is, again, going back to non-payable assessments. I sort of talked about this one when we talked on the disclosure side. This is just in the purchase agreement. You'll see the language here, and really the only thing they're looking to say is down here, 239, 245. Buyer shall pay any unpaid special assessments payable in the year in the year following closing and thereafter, the payment of which is not otherwise herein provided. You can still negotiate what happens in the year of closing. Does the seller pay all of it? Do they split it? Does the buyer assume it? Whatever it would be. So you still have the option to choose on the year in closing, but it's just bringing clarity that says, hey, you accept anything in the years subsequent or following, not subsequent, following closing. So pretty simple stuff, but it's, again, just something that we're trying to bring clarity to. Watching the chat and don't see anything. All right, contract for deed addendums. Replace multiple seller with investor seller. And this was a statutory change that came down. And the PA with the new construction of the cemetery clause is also in there. So again, if you are not familiar with contract for deed, please reach out. And we will guide you through that. Contract for deeds are coming back. I think I had 3 conversations yesterday with people on the team about doing contract for deeds and assumable mortgages. So just be aware that those are out there and tools for you to work through. Lease agreements. This is fun. New statute, thanks to legislature, owner is prohibited from requiring any additional fees, charges, or deposits for service or support animals. Brought clarity. Service animals, this was always the category you weren't able to do, but support animals, think of like emotional support animals, you were able to charge a $200 pet deposit or an additional $25 a month, whatever you or your client's platform was. Now it's all lumped into the category of do not touch. Think of it like a protected class. Now, for those of you who own investment properties, this is kind of not great because you still have, dogs still pee on carpets. I don't care if they're emotional support or service animals. They still get neglected at times and things happen. They chew on cabinets and the whole thing. So you just got to be careful. We talked a lot about this at one of our groups is, you have the option to increase across the board, right, to offset the additional expense. So your security deposit maybe is going to be 1.5 times rent comparative to like 1 times rent. And that might just be what your new standard is across the board to help offset that additional space. You can still charge for damages. It's always been true. But you no longer can do any additional fees, charges, or deposits for them. So kind of the way that it goes. Lease agreement, this talks about the proportionate billing formula, right? So if a tenant pays utilities and they're provided for by the owner, tenant shall pay the owner for such utilities in the demand amounts as identified in the statement. So basically you're going to issue the statement and most people will do it by square footage. Some people just do it equally, like trash as an example. Trash is oftentimes just done by unit, doesn't care how much you use or don't use. Utilities and things like that are usually based upon square footage. So whatever the formula is, you just have to be able to disclose it, right? And so owner apportions utility service and non-usage charges for natural gas and or water and sewer. Yes, no. If yes, see the addendum of lease agreement utility bills, which is attached and made part of. So again, just a little bit more clarity. If you use the Minnesota lease agreements, that is an option for you. This is just some covenants, a little bit of detail brought into the lease agreement as well, right? Premise and all common areas are fit for the intended use of the parties. Owner will take necessary repairs unless where the tenant was the issue. Owner will keep the premise up to applicable federal, state, and local codes. So just a little bit of protection for tenants coming in here in order to covenant that the owner is actually going to do what they should be doing by law, which is kind of interesting, but it brings clarity to the form. Commercial PA, this one just talks specifically about chronic wasting disease. So it's just saying, has it been detected on the property? Yes, no. Again, this is a statutory requirement. This is a material fact requirement, which is why it's been brought forth and moved onto our forms. And if you ever need one, there is actually a disclosure statement, the chronic wasting disease. So if you ever need that one, that exists. So any questions on any of that before we kind of dive in? I know I went through that really fast, but I'm just trying to make sure we have time to work on the important stuff. Okay, seeing none, let's start to break people's brains a little bit. Okay, total compensation. This is the listing contract primarily. Now you will know a couple things. we have our forms ready to go to transaction desk. That will have, our broker admin fee line in there. It will have the multiple disclosure, the wire fraud disclosure, all those kind of things that we add into our listing contract to cover you guys will all be uploaded, and we're just waiting on transaction desk. So that's kind of where that is at for now. You can continue to use the old form or the new form, all depending upon your personal business. But we anticipate having those forms probably by the middle of August, if not September 1 at the latest. It's just a little out of our hands. So this is the fun stuff. Total broker compensation. What we added here was just an opportunity to bring some clarity to what this line is, right? So like, hey, let's bold it so that people are clear. All right, so it's a total compensation piece. Lines 116 through 121 here, they have not changed. These are exactly as they are on the current forms. No change at all. Now, again, we request that you fill out all three of those lines, right? So what's the retainer? What's your total compensation? Your compensation, right? As Coldwell Banker Crown Realtors, what is our total compensation as a percentage or a dollar amount inside of those lines, okay? Now you get the privilege of an alternative option, which did always exist, by the way, inside of 122 to 123. So this is where we start talking in a couple different lanes here. So line 122, if the seller agrees to pay the buyer broker's compensation directly to the buyer broker, from the seller straight to the buyer brokerage, okay, then the seller's obligation to pay the broker's compensation, that would be Coldwell Banker Crown Realtors, as specified in 119 to 120, shall be reduced by the amount paid up to a dollar amount or a percentage of the selling price. Okay. So there's two main ways to kind of look at this, right? So you have cooperating compensation, which is the way we've been doing it for eons, which is where the money flows from the buyer to the seller, from the seller to us as the listing company, us to the buyer's brokerage, right? So it's this nice little chain of events where the money goes. A seller concession is when the buyer's money goes to the seller, and then the seller bypasses us and just pays the buyer's broker directly. Follow me? So again, there's two different paths to kind of get through this thing to ultimately get everybody paid. The option has always existed, right? You think back to for sale by owners, right? You just took a listing brokerage out of the equation, but really the seller, oftentimes you would negotiate and the seller would just pay you your fee through the buyer's money, right? It's the same kind of a thing. It's just now somehow we're making it overly complicated, but it's really not. We've been doing it forever. It's been an option. It has been minimally used, but it has been used. And now the option is just written out in our listing contract in the event that the seller wants to do that directly. Now, this line here, I think it's important to make note of right here is the shall reduce statement. And that's the one you really need to have some clarity on and making sure that you know that whatever you put in these fields will actually reduce your compensation on lines 119 and 120. Okay. And we're going to spend some time walking through some scenarios to make sure you guys really understand this. But these are new lines and new sections inside of our PA. Now, some people are going to say, well, what should I be doing there? Well, let me guide you, right? So we are recommending, and it is the stance of Coldwell Banker Crown that we believe in cooperating compensation. We believe that it's good for the consumer. We believe that it's good for the seller. We believe that it's good for all parties. So if you don't know why you're going to fill out lines 122 to 124, you need to put zeros in there. Now, I don't want to tell you that there's not a time when you would put it in there, because there is. But when we talk about the broad scheme and how you run your business, it is our recommendation that you leave these as zeros. And we'll talk more about why that will make sense when we start walking through some scenarios. But that is going to be the big change coming forward. So when you think about the listing contract, as a company, we still recommend offering cooperating compensation. Okay. So if you were to do that, you're going to fill the listing contract out the exact same way you always have, right? And you're going to fill that out with probably a 0 retainer fee, 6%, and let's just say $3,500. That's a really big $3,500, but you get the idea, right? So whatever those minimums are, right? And if you go into a listing presentation and you say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I have, my fee is 4% and we're going to pay out 2%. right? We're going to offer cooperating compensation. Well, on the next page of the listing contract is the same section unchanged that says we shall or shall not, as the listing brokerage, offer cooperating compensation. And then we identify and agree with the seller in what we are offering for people representing or assisting buyers, right? And we have those two check marks, right? So if you're doing 2%, maybe you do them in both. Maybe you pay facilitators a different fee. I always pay facilitators a lower fee because I feel they're not earning their full commission. Whatever the process is and how you run your business, that's how that would work. So we would still operate underneath the same structure that we so often have. Now, hopefully that brings a little bit of clarity, at least to this section, and in the nicest way possible. If you're like, Brandon, this doesn't make sense, super cool. Do it the exact same way you've always been doing it. And in 123 and 124, please put zeros, because this will be something that we will flag out of compliance. And the reason being is we need a way to guarantee that somebody isn't coming back after your money, right? This is an open line on a contract. We need it filled out so that we know what you and your seller agreed to at the table, so that in the event that they bring us one contract and it has 2.5 written on there, but your contract says 0, now we have a legal battle that's just not worth going down. And it's easier to have the conversation right away. And if your conversation is, you know what, I take care of paying the buyer's agent and incentivizing them through my commission, that's totally fine. Then you would just tell the seller, these are if you're going to pay them directly, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, but you're not going to do that. I'm going to take care of you. So we're going to put zeros on these lines to make sure you're not obligated for any additional compensation. And it's that simple, right? And then we move on. Okay, you may have questions on that. Let me get through the next couple and then we'll open it up though, okay? So now I want to switch sides to the buyer rep agreement, okay? So this one has some new language, right? That basically says the broker, you and I, may not receive more compensation for brokerage services provided to buyer from any source that exceeds the amount or rate agreed to in this contract, okay? So that's where this contract gets pretty important, folks, right? If you've been putting 000 for a long time, you've probably had your hand slapped by me, asking you don't think you're worth anything, right? You're willing to work for 0. If that's how you do it, you just need to know moving forward, you're going to work for 0. In the event that we get audited, or MLS, who's the governing authority, why they are, I don't know, but that's the rule. So MLS is going to ask for contracts and verify payment. We're going to be stuck, right? So you have to have a conversation about what your fee is to help a buyer. Now, you can always go back and amend that, right? You can always go back and change whatever that looks like. You could change that compensation for a specific property if you wanted to. You could change it 17 times if you wanted to. Now, I'll tell you, those of us doing doc review and compliance checks would probably not appreciate that. But at the end of the day, if that's how your business is going to run, we're here to support you in doing that. My suggestion is that you establish your value proposition and you allow people that space in order to choose that. You've heard me say kind of that menu of services option on the buyer representation. I have taught buyer rep courses forever. I was just in the cities yesterday talking about a menu of services thing with a brokerage that I'm pretty close with. And it's great conversations. And the reality is that you get the chance to say, I'm worth 3 in this situation. I'm worth 4 in this situation. I'm worth 1, right? But what are you going to do in those situations in order to do it? Because you got to be able to say, that's the ceiling. Whatever you put on this form is the ceiling of which you can get paid. So if you say, oh, I work for whatever, you can't do that. You have to put a number in there. You can't put a range. It has to be a number. And if you say, oh, I work for 2%, but all of a sudden you write an offer on something that's offering 3%, you only get to collect the 2 and you left that 1% on the table. Yes, you can go back and amend the buyer rep, but now you have to be able to have that conversation with that client and say, hey, by the way, we need to amend my fee because I'm getting an extra % here. And you have to be prepared to know why you're worth that extra %. And maybe it's as simple as, well, it doesn't cost you anything, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, so just sign the form. Well, okay, it doesn't cost me anything, and they might sign it. That's a reality. The other side of it could be is that they might say, well, why are you worth another 1%? What else are you doing that's bringing value to the table? And then you have to be able to articulate that. I'm not saying one way is right or wrong. It's a business practice that you get to decide, but it is a conversation you need to be able to work through. And you might not know how to do it until you get a couple tries at it, right? A couple reps at it, and then you might start to find your language on how you're going to do that. But that's where the buyer consultation is really critical. So new language. Oh yes, you can't earn more than what was agreed to. We just said that. Definition of working with. So we had a lot of questions on what does working with mean. And the definition that we are held to is one that I still don't agree with, but it doesn't matter because I don't set the rules. Working with is set as what I call the threshold rule for those of us who've been around a long time. The moment you cross a threshold with somebody, that's the definition we go by that says we are working with somebody. We are crossing a threshold. We are showing them a door, a property. That's the definition of working with, not, sending them forms, sending them listings, not even doing a consultation or anything else. Not, talking about school districts, giving them information on the local governing authorities, what they can and can't do on a lake shore, telling them which lakes they want to focus on. None of that stuff counts as working with by the definition of the imposed practice changes. All you have to worry about is you cannot show anybody a property without some form of a written agreement established. So working with is a broad term, but by the definition of when we need that contract, it's once you cross a threshold with somebody. Okay. So here's a little bit of on the buy side about our recommended process as a company. Of course, we're always going to recommend that you start the conversation with a consultation. Buy coffee, bring them to a brewery, sit at a park, like whatever you got to do, get a couple minutes with these people and then really walk through your value proposition, get agency in the way, walk them through why they should work with you exclusively. Maybe we've asked a bunch of you and the feedback was always, can we wait till fourth quarter? So yes, we're going to wait till fourth quarter. And what we're going to do is we're going to build out a training that says, here's kind of a pre-buyer consultation. And we're going to show you how to build that inside of Moxie so that you can email that out directly and have some ways to augment it and customize it if you want to, or at least you have a pre-meeting presentation kind of built for you that you can just email right through Moxie. You'll get a notification when they open it. You'll know how many times they opened it, so on and so forth. So it'll be a pretty cool component that we'll be able to get to you. That's coming in quarter 4 because all of you said, please don't give us something like that to do in quarter 3 because we all want to focus on it. So I heard you, and we're going to push that to quarter 4. If you feel that's something you want to do sooner, please reach out. I'm happy to help you in a one-on-one capacity too. So once you do the consultation, that's our first thing. We always recommend doing a consultation. Then what we want you to do is try to get that exclusive representation contract dialed in, right? Get the buyer exclusive because it gets you under contract as their exclusive buyer's agent and guarantees your compensation. If they refuse to sign that because maybe they're only up for the weekend or on a holiday and they just want to see 3 properties, super cool. Here's my non-exclusive. This allows you, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, to go out and look for whatever you so want in the space with whoever you so want. But if you buy anything that I show you and I become an assisting person on, then you owe me compensation for that, right? And then you have to define your compensation. And lastly, if they're like, I'm not signing anything, then it goes, I'm really sorry. And you can always blame me, you guys. And I tell you this often, if you need somebody to be the bad guy to protect your business practice, you can blame me, right? You can say, I'm really sorry. My broker requires that we have to sign this by new practice changes that came about some lawsuits at the national level. I need you to sign this facilitator agreement. Now, agency becomes an incredible asset in this situation, right? Because facilitator, you're due what of your fiduciary obligations are you required on a facilitator agreement? I saw a couple of mouths move. Confidentiality, right? That's the only thing that you give is confidentiality in a facilitator role. It's the default agency relationships in the great state of Minnesota. So you have to be able to work around that as well. The easy way is to say, I can't advise or counsel you, right? And the words I use is advise and advocate because I like alliterations. Mr. or Mrs. Buyer, I cannot advocate and advise you if you sign a facilitator, but I can open the door for you today and I can tell you every factual piece of information that's available, but I cannot provide guidance or advice to you or advocate for you in the event that we do this. Now, we could sign a facilitator today and maybe we cancel that and we can sign a buyer rep exclusive later on. We can do that, right? One of the things somebody said, well, what are you going to do, Brandon? And I said, well, I'm trying really hard not to sell because I care too much about you guys. And I'm trying to make sure we're doing something of value here. In the event that I need to, though, I thought, well, what if I can't get a buyer rep signed? right? Maybe we do a facilitator and my fee is going to be $250, but I'm going to show you 3 properties because Brandon has a rule that we go on 3 dates before we define our relationship, right? That's my rule. You have whatever rule you want, but we do 3 dates before we define our relationship. And maybe my facilitator agreement says, here are my 3 dates, you pick them, right? But it's gonna be $250. They cut me a check, I bring it back to the office, they deposit it, it gets split, and I get into my account, and we're done. Now all of a sudden they're like, well, actually, Brandon, we really like you. We want to go on a 4th date. I don't do 4th dates, not without a clear definition of what we're doing here, team. And they go, okay, that's fine. We like you. Let's do it. You're our guy. Okay, cool. So let's sign an exclusive. Now what I might choose to do is say, oh, by the way, I'm going to give you credit for that facilitator agreement. You don't have to, but you could. And now all of a sudden in my retainer box on my buyer rep, I put $250, which shall be reduced from my total compensation of, let's say, 3% or 2,500, whichever is greater. You follow me? So you get the option to kind of build your practice how you so want. And depending upon our markets, it's all going to be different, right? Like, okay, well, resort markets are a little bit tougher because we get people who are coming up and they're like one timers and they just want to see something. I can't show that to you unless you sign this thing. That's where a facilitator agreement might come into play, and then we can kind of build a story around that. Touring agreements. I've had a couple people ask about this. We cannot find a touring agreement that satisfies the agency requirements in the state of Minnesota or North Dakota. We just can't do it. We've talked with our legal team, and we can get it down to 3 pages. But at that point, I'm saying, well, if you got to go through 3 pages, you might as well go through a full rep doc, right? Like, it's just as easy to get to that point and begin to build the value from that point. So it's not approved yet. I keep trying to get it down to 1 page, but by the time we get it down to 1 page, the font size is not considered, what did our attorney say? Legal prowess or something? Like it's, I don't know, proper font size or whatever, by the time we got it on 1 page. So we had to do a couple things there. Anyway, so we can't do it. That's the bottom line right now. Doesn't mean we're not trying, just means I don't have it. And we are not authorizing exterior touring agreements. I know Zillow has theirs, which is complete garbage and designed just to drive more leads back to Zillow. North Star is supposedly coming out with one. No idea what that's going to look like. Haven't seen a copy yet to know if it's going to satisfy it, but I feel like they're going to be in the same situation. But they might approach it a little bit differently. Is like, how do we help the consumer? But our job is, how do we help you, right? So when we talk about trying to help you and protect you and your business, a touring agreement is not, I do not believe it's in your best interest at this point in time. Again, we're going to try to build one, but it's proving to be very, very difficult. Okay. See, this is so fun, you guys. Okay. So, well, before we dive into the co-op one, any questions yet on the listing contract, total compensation, or the buyer rep contract? Any questions there that we want to do? Are we feeling good? Neil, I see your hand. Yep, you're on mute though, my friend.
There we are. Okay. Open houses.
Yes.
I guess I haven't been paying all that close attention to all this stuff, but we run open houses. People walk through. What does that look like in regards to non-exclusive facilitator, all that?
Good clarity. Is it our listing?
I would, yeah.
I would assume.
House. Somebody comes through. And like the ones I talked about last weekend up in Alexandria, where if your people come and you don't have them identify that they're working with you when they show up, so we can honor that.
Yep.
That's how I approach that with all those emails that I sent out. But my question is, John Q. Public comes through, I ask that question, they say, no. I mean, do we have, what do we have to do in those situations? Do we have to have them sign something?
Great question. So here's the benefit to being with a larger company. Once again, right? The more signs we have, the better, because now it gives you the opportunity to, through agency, you actually represent the seller, right? So open house situations are really fun because we have the listing as a company. So Crown carries the listing. You as an agent of Crown represent the seller. Right? So that's pretty straightforward. Inside the open house aspect, you can show those people around as much as you want. They can cross the threshold because you are not working with them. That is defined as you are working on behalf of the seller. doing a marketing effort to try to get people through the door. Now, once that buyer says, hey, I want you to write an offer, now you have a different conversation to have, as far as, am I repping the seller and you're unrepresented, or am I repping you? What does that like in a dual agency capacity? But as far as open houses go, absolutely. And that's one of the things we've been pushing pretty heavily, is talking about those, right? And we just did one. We had Tony did one here, and I mean, he had 12 different people walk through a half $500,000+ property, and he wrote an offer off of an open house, which I thought was crazy, but you can sell them off of open houses, people, as much as I didn't think you could. So anyway, that is the answer. You most certainly can. They do not need an agreement, because you are technically not working with them at that point in time, because you're repping the seller. Good question. Vicky, I see you.
Yeah. So just a point that, we had training on the North Dakota side here too. And I know that it's 2 different states, but just one of the questions that came up in that one was, so now you're, just to use your example, Neil, you're sitting in that open house. And so, yeah, this house isn't really the one I want, but there's one down the street that's for sale. Can you show me that one? And that's where what we were told is, on this side, now you need to have a contract with them to represent them to go. So they said, bring things with you so that you can fill them out, have that conversation before you walk down the street with them.
Yep. And that's very, very accurate. Yep. Appreciate that, Vicky. Good. Okay. All right, good. All right. So here's a new form that we get the privilege to work through as well. And this is a big one, you guys. So this is our cooperating compensation form. In the event that you are going to offer cooperating compensation. So if you remember back when I first said on the listing contract, if you don't know what the concession is, or you don't want to change your business practice, totally fine. This is the only new form that you need to bring with you to the table, and this is the cooperating compensation. This is a new form. It should be signed by not only us and whatever other entity, right, other side of the party, whatever brokerages are involved, it needs to be signed before a PA is executed. In an ideal world, I get that there are weird scenarios, but in an ideal world, it's signed before the PA, so that then once this is signed, then you can send that, if you're repping the buyer, you can send the buyer agent compensation disclosure form before the PA, just like you're supposed to, and on and on and on. Okay, so before the PA is the win here. This is a per property, per buyer space. Now, if you do not put a buyer name here, and I should point this out right here, right? If you say no buyer name on here, it could mean just kind of an open area, right? Which not necessarily isn't bad, and we'll walk through what those situations would look like. So this thing cannot be uploaded to MLS, right? So we shared with you guys that if you utilize our system or the Coldwell Banker Moxie Suite, both of those platforms will be displaying buyer agent compensation and seller concession. We're still working with our vendor internally on the seller concession side, but that is something that we are working on. So we will have both of those fields displayed on our listings and our listings only. Now, we are also working to see if we can have documents being attached to our listings on there, so that agents might have the option to go to our website. They'll find, 123 Paul Bunyan Drive, and they'll see, oh, Parker is paying 7% because he's a super awesome agent and a really good negotiator. So he's paying us 7%. And here's my cooperating compensation form that I can download and sign with my PA, right? So we're trying to figure out a way to make it as simple as possible. The reality is, until we get there, this could be a little bit of a stalling tool and a stalling tactic, which isn't great, but we'll talk a little bit about that. So this cannot be an MLS. Compensation, which I don't, this is, however it is compensation, it does not go towards the limit or the cap on seller concessions. So it's been pulled out, and it's been identified by Freddie and Fannie VA that it is a standalone fee, so it doesn't get wrapped into the umbrella of total cap concessions. There is no expiration date on this thing, so you want to be really careful on that. So if you renegotiate compensation, you need to make sure that this is a replacement form is issued, and you might want to check that just to make sure that you have proper date stamps. An example of this would be if Ashley and I have a deal and I'm at ABC and she's at Crown, you know, maybe we potentially tried to get a deal on a new listing she had, and she was offering 3% at that time. So we had the form, we signed it, it said 3% for my buyer's name and everything else. I still have that form because it's a contractual document. We should be keeping records of it. But now 4 weeks later, I saw a price change, but now instead of 3%, now she's offering 2.7. Well, now my buyer says, oh, hey, they just dropped it 10 grand. I think let's go take a stab at it again. Great. Well, now I have this form that we've already signed and agreed to at 3, right? But the date stamp on line 1 is updated, but now Ashley renegotiated her cooperating compensation to help get her a price change. And now I come in and I submit an offer. It's on Ashley as the listing agent to make sure that she has the right form and the right co-op, because she could say, we cannot sign this until you give me an updated cooperating compensation form. And we would know it's updated by the date stamp if we were ever to go to court over it, we would say, this is the latest one that we agreed to, so on and so forth. Does that make sense, you guys? So as we're looking at price adjustments, you may be looking to, you know, the seller might say, well, you didn't do your job. I wanted to pay you less. Okay, so are you adjusting yours? You adjusting co-op? Are they adjusting concessions? And all that would need to be updated and taken care of. So you want to make sure that you're keeping an eye on this form as it comes through. This will be a form that we watch for in compliance as well, especially if your business practice is to offer cooperating compensation, which is our recommendation as a company. Then we will be specific. We will have to require this form. Otherwise, we won't know what to pay or what to authorize the title companies to release in those situations. So we said this no buyer name could mean that you're paying co-op no matter what. So it could just be a random thing in that saying. And the big thing here is we have updated our errors and omissions insurance carrier to know them. It is being updated in our handbook, in our policy book, which is something that we're working on as well. And that is something that you guys are authorized to sign this form. That's the bottom line. As our leadership team was talking, we just said, we don't want to put you guys in a position to be waiting on one of us to sign a form if you're up against a hard deadline and need to submit stuff. Now we used to not have to do this because we had unilateral compensation, right? An offer of unilateral compensation inside of the MLS. We used to be able to timestamp it. We had history. We could say this is what it is and all the great things. And that's great. However, we're now kind of stuck to saying, well, we no longer have that. We need to decide what's happening on a case-by-case basis now. And instead of having a database to go to like we did with MLS, now we're going to have these forms, because this is the only form, you guys. If you don't have this signed, we don't have anything to go after a listing company to say you owe us money, because they're going to say, where in the world did I agree to pay you money? And this is the only thing we get to hold them to as of August 17th. This is the only form we get to hold them to, or maybe a modified form depending upon the brokerage. This is the form we are going to use. We didn't see a reason to change this one unless after some reps, we're going to learn some stuff about the forms and the documents, and then we might modify our internal documents. But as of right now, this is the form that we are going to use.
Brandon, real quick.
Yeah, go for it, buddy.
Sorry to interrupt. We chatted yesterday in the Bemidji office about how there really is no ending. So this being, a contract really between brokerages, there's no ending date to this. So we kind of chatted about, would you recommend in the other section putting some kind of, if you're the listing agent, putting some kind of end date to that to make it more valid if there was ever a legality issue that way?
You could put a termination on there. By a legal definition, when the listing contract expires, this offer of cooperating compensation would expire, because you don't have the right to represent that particular property anymore. An end date is not a bad idea, especially as my situation, my scenario with Ashley getting a price reduction and changing it. You could always do that. Certainly it is an option. You could check the other box and says this agreement is good for 2 weeks, or good until May 31, 25, or whatever you would want to do. I would be careful by putting whatever date you put on there. I would not have it match your listing contract, just because you're giving the enemy, right, our partners in crime out there, you're giving them a date to potentially start to look at.
Oh, sure.
I mean, you'd have to be really sneaky as I say this out loud, like, to say, oh, Parker, your form ends on May 31st. I'm going to check the listing on 6/1 to see if I can go after it, right? Like, they could. Might be goofy,
Yep.
but they could. Yeah. So you could put an end date, if you so wanted. I have no problem with that. Good observation.
Thank you. Second question on this. So what if you submit an offer and you send this form with, our brokerage signature would be your signature with our buyer's name, our address, or excuse me, the address of the property of the offer. You send both the offer, whatever disclosures, pre-approval, along with this form, and they do not send it back to you. Not saying that's for sure going to happen, but there's probably it's going to happen eventually to
Yep.
somebody where it just doesn't get returned. Would you recommend putting something in the offer associating this form with that payout to that offer?
Absolutely not. So you cannot make this agreement a contingency of the PA because we are not members of the purchase agreement, nor are the buyer and seller members of this agreement. So you cannot legally. Now, do people do it? Sure. Is it legal? Will it hold up in court? Absolutely not. Because you're making now, if we all signed the PA and agreeing to the same terms, then we could tie it together, but we don't do that because that's not how purchase agreements work. So no, you cannot. Now, in that situation, that's where, so most likely, well, that's a situation where you're running up against a deadline. You got to get the offer in. You got to do something, right? And so you're like a Hail Mary. This guy, wow, Brandon never got back to me. What am I going to do? He said all offers are due by 5. I'm just going to send it with and hope that they sign it. Well, they could sign your offer just like they maybe don't sign personal property or whatever else. And if you don't know that they were advertising cooperating compensation, you're just asking and hoping. And they could say, well, we signed the deal, but I'm not paying you anything. And guess what? Your buyer's under contract to purchase a property, and now you're not getting it. You are not getting any cooperating compensation. So you're going to have to get it from your buyer per your agreement. And then now the buyer might be kind of pissed about that. It's hard to say. And that's where you can use the PA in those situations when you're up against a deadline. That's where the new language in the PA would come into play. And we'll talk about that in a short minute here. Yep.
One quick thing on that too, though, prior to sending the offer, I mean, days on market are taking a little bit longer if there's nothing else shaking. Before you even send the offer off, get this signed, then send the offer. It's a step-by-step process.
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing this long enough to know, doesn't matter if they're your best friend in this business, things can go sideways in a real quick hurry, and that with the relationships you have with some of the agents in this business, period.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter if you're in a small town Sauk Center or probably worse in bigger communities. But if you have time to get this signed before you even send that offer, that's probably the best practice I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I completely agree with that. Getting this thing signed prior and early on is going to be your best bet. Almost like you guys, the way I've been, doing this in some of our coaching stuff is to say, this is the form. Once you get a showing request, you should keep a note or something on your phone that says, here's a link, right? Or here's the link to my Google Drive or my Dropbox or whatever to that compensation form. Once you get that notice, you can leave it. You could leave it at the open house if you wanted to, but again, now you're leaving an open face document out there. So there's a couple of things. There's just a unique way that you got to figure out, again, how your business runs. But I think once you get a showing on one of your listings, you want to get that right out there. And I think once you request a showing, you want to follow it up and say, and we're going to learn how every brokerage is going to do this, right? So every brokerage is going to be a little bit different, but we're going to learn, that, well, XYZ brokerage, they're old school. I got to call them just like I used to have to go to their office to get a key. I got to call them and get an answer, and they're going to fax over this form to me, right? Well, I know that ABC, they got it on their website. I'll just check there really quick and I'll download the form, right? So we're going to learn how other brokerages run this, which is really irritating that we can't consolidate it, but that's the playground that we get to play in right now. So anyway, kind of a dead horse at this point, I think. So, okay. So let me move on. We'll talk about, whoops, that's the wrong. Here we go. Okay. Oh, sorry, you guys. I got to quit my annotation piece. Here we go. All right, so this is the full broker compensation agreement. You can see here as we sort of walk through this thing, the definitions up top here. Seller is, right? Buyer is. Seller broker is a real estate broker who's entered into a written agreement with the seller to market the property for sale or lease. Buyer's broker is a real estate broker assisting or representing the buyer. Again, so this would work on facilitation or representation on the buy side. Compensation, one or the other. Notice down here it says choose one. Okay, so if you know that you're working on a manufactured home deal of $17,000 and your 3% isn't going to be enough, write in the dollar amount or the percentage, right? Or maybe you have a different agreement that you're gonna walk through, and that's totally fine. You are authorized as an agent of Coldwell Banker Crown Realtors to sign this form. You do not need to wait for me or your managing director to sign this form. You have the authority to do this. I don't know what other companies are going to do. I know some of the bigger places are empowering their agents to sign the form as well, because I don't want to be in the middle of you not getting paid. So not really my favorite thing to do. So that's going to be the form there. Now, to go back to the question about, hey, we're coming up against a deadline. This is the section of the PA that was recently added. This is on page 9, sandwiched between who are the agents and is it dual agency sections, is a new section called seller's contribution to buyer broker's compensation. Say that 7 times fast. Now, this is an important one because we start looking at a few languages here that I think are really important. So the seller agrees to pay the buyer's broker. This is what we would call a concession because it's bypassing us, right? Buyer's money is going to the seller. The seller is now paying the buyer's broker directly instead of paying us, and we pay the buyer's broker through cooperating compensation. So this is a concession. It's bypassing us. The funny part is, you guys, is that this is kind of how we are already doing it. Again, this makes me feel old every time, like back in the day. I used to be mad at people when they would say that, and now I'm one of those people. But anyway, so we used to have to bring, commission checks, physical checks to closing in order to give to the other side of the transaction because the title companies were not authorized to do that. Statutory change, we could give, as a company, we give written notice to all title companies in Minnesota. We want you to pay this amount to the buyer's broker on our behalf, right? Take it from our fee. So we're doing that, but we never really see the money. So it kind of feels like, well, isn't this already what we're doing? The seller's already paying it, kind of. But that's just because of the way we've adapted. And this is actually just making it even cleaner, if I'm really honest with you. But it is a mind shift for many of us. So the seller agrees to pay the buyer's broker compensation at closing of blank percentage of the selling price or a dollar amount, which is in addition, this is the key word, to any seller's contribution to buyer's closing costs paid at closing. So this is completely separate than the other lines of the PA that say, hey, I want you to pay prepaids and prepay my taxes and my insurance. I need $3,000 to help fund those buckets because I'm a first-time home buyer. Okay. So this is saying you're going to pay, 2% over here and you're going to pay 3% over here. So the seller is now paying a total of 5% towards the buyer's fees. Okay. So this is additive. And this amount is in addition to the listing. Again, this is another big word. In addition to the listing broker's cooperating compensation, if any. Okay. So what matters here is twofold. Number one, it's in addition to the buyer's closing cost prepaids, which is previously identified in the PA. And it's also a disclosure to the seller that says, hey, this is in addition to what you're already paying Coldwell Banker Crown to offer out as cooperating compensation, which we've agreed to in the listing contract. Okay. Couple of scenarios here to walk through with you. Number one, we're up against a deadline. Parker, to kind of go back to your situation. I sent the whole PA as the buyer's rep. I know on ABC's website, they're offering 2% of a buyer cooperating compensation, but my fee is 3%. Okay. Well, I might come in here and I'm going to send the cooperating compensation agreement and I'm going to say, hey, why are you guys not signing this thing? I need this signed. And finally, it's 4:45. The deadline's 5 p.m. I'm going to text my buyers, hey, I'm going to send you a new PA. We're going to change line 403 to be a full 3% to ensure that we get paid because I don't know what's happening. This other agent isn't signing our cooperating compensation agreement, and I need to make sure that we get paid and that I'm taking care of your money, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. Yep, sounds good. Send it over. Great. Done. That's when I would put 3 here. because I don't have a cooperating compensation agreement to protect that 2% coming from what the company says they're going to pay me. Just because it's on their website and they say they're paying us 2% doesn't mean they're paying it. We need that form to be signed by all parties to ensure that that we're getting compensated. Okay. So that's a situation when you might dial in and put a full 3% here. Now, the other side of the equation is, let's just say same scenario. I send this PA out. And beforehand, as the best practice, I know it's coming and I say, hey, I need that cooperating compensation agreement. I understand you guys are paying 2%. The agent goes, yep, here you go, signed agreement. I now have a cooperating compensation agreement that says 2%. Awesome. Well, my buyer rep says 1. So guess what I might put in here instead to make me whole? Follow me, right? So now, oh, look at that. AI now determined my hand is up. So now I have an opportunity to make myself whole on the situation where I don't necessarily have to have my buyer pay the differential, because this amount is in addition to the cooperating compensation. So this is what makes me whole as the buyer's agent. Now I might have to have a conversation and go, well, the seller might come back and they could say, no, Brandon, we're not paying you anything more. We paid you some. You got to be a big boy. Go get the rest on your own. Okay. Now we have a point of negotiation that we are able to kind of work from and begin to negotiate from, because that's really what this comes down to. Is this is just a negotiation point at this point in time. It has nothing to do with anything else other than that. Questions yet?
Quick question.
Yep.
Yeah, is this, so I doubt this is available to use today. This is in 17 days or whatever. This can be utilized.
August 1st, you'll have this one tomorrow.
Okay.
Because this is the purchase agreement. Yep.
Right. Yeah, this would have, yeah. Okay. I could have
Yep.
used this yesterday is what I'm saying. So, okay. That's my only question. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is something that we've been using in different things. And now some people have said, well, Brandon, what if I don't have a cooperating compensation, and if I have to come in here and I have to ask for my full 3% here, and what does that mean? Like my buyer's offer is going to lose out because that other agent didn't sign the cooperating compensation form. Potentially, that is a reality of it, and so you have to have those conversations. The other thing you can do as a negotiation strategy is just like we would normally do, especially with first-time home buyers. If you've got a $100,000 property and they would need the full 6% in closing costs, you might offer $106,000 and hope that the appraisal, comes to fruition. That's something we've done. You can do the same thing. You can add another 3 to that, and maybe your offer is $109,000 now, because it nets the seller the same, but it gets you paid in all the same ways too. So there's a couple of ways that you can stack that stuff when you're looking at adjusting the purchase price to offset those seller prepaids. Do you have to worry about appraisals? Yes. Is it a way to get your, your offer to the top, so to speak? It might buy you a little bit of time, right? A good agent might go back and be like, dude, I'm so sorry, I didn't get you that cooperating compensation thing. We know this thing isn't going to appraise for 109. Here's my co-op agreement and a counter offer. Let's get this thing back down to where it should be. And next thing you know, you're removing this or whatever else. Now, I did ask the question of the forms committee and the executive committee, and I said, why is the counteroffer form not changed to have this section specifically addressed on the counteroffer form? Because I feel like dumb agents out there are going to struggle with this, and they're going to go, oh, well, I know it's cooperating compensation, but I want my 3% anyway. I want 5 because I'm lazy and selfish and don't know my value. Okay, well, that's fine. But now we have to go back and amend this thing because dumb agents don't know how compensation works. And this is a key area you guys got to watch, because you got to remember, this is in addition to any cooperating compensation. So if a seller signs this on a whim, and you think that, well, 3%, that's what we were offering on co-op anyway. Well, no, now it's actually 6, because now we've agreed through cooperating compensation agreement that we're paying 3, and now the seller's paid 3. That buyer's agent's getting a total of 6% on this deal, all because we maybe didn't think or didn't validate the understanding of the PA all the way through. So this is an incredible section we really got to watch, and how to make sure that dumb agents don't do something dumb and we overlook it as part of our speed process just to get the deal done, signed, under contract, and on to the next thing. So pretty important piece of the PA and how you guys want to use this, but I think it gives some great flexibility. And again, this is all stuff we've done in the past. you know, Parker, to your point, you could have used this yesterday. In the past, I've just used the seller concession piece, and I've just said, hey, I'm asking for 1% to make up my differential because you're not paying enough, or on the co-op, I need 0.5 extra as a seller concession, and it's a prepaid. Now we have a section to specifically call it out that doesn't go against the lending limit. Miss Nelson.
So if you do see this, and you want to, like, you're representing the listing and you want to negotiate this, so can you write on the counter offer then?
Mhm.
Or, and just say on line 406, this will be changed to 0 or whatever.
Exactly.
You can correct it on the counter offer.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, okay.
Yep, it is just another term of the PA that is fully negotiable, because this is the seller's money straight up, right? This is
Mhm.
the seller paying the buyer broker directly, so it's an opportunity for them to negotiate. So it's their money. You want to be really cognitive of it and say, yes, I understand. No, I don't understand. We need to do something different, or whatever that looks like. But yeah, you can absolutely check the other box on the counter offer. Line 406 shall read 0, shall read 1%, 0.5, whatever y'all agree to. Yep.
Okay,
question.
thanks.
This is my favorite. Okay. Any other questions? This is good. Okay. Right. Okay, so let's talk about, so here's the concession form. This is an addendum or amendment to the listing contract. Remember I talked to you about, you know, if you ever need to go back and change terms because of whatever. It doesn't change cooperating compensation. All this changes is concessions. When I asked the question, why is this section just not in the listing contract? Frankly, there wasn't a consensus from the forms committee as to why, because really this thing is only like lines 8 through 14 is really all that's substantive. Or sorry, 8 through 17. Sorry, 17 is very important. So again, we're trying it. And if we don't like it, we can always modify our internal form too. So you guys just, and we'll be asking feedback of you once we get a couple reps of this kind of, you know, probably November-ish or so, we'll be seeking feedback on, tell us about the forums, how is it, where you stuck? And, you know, I'm sure we'll get questions asked of us, and we'll do all those things too. So we'll get some good stuff in the middle. But this is used when, so if your seller says, yes, I want to pay the buyer's broker directly, super cool, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. Here's the new form that we're going to have. And here's why this needs to be done. Because there's a couple pieces in here that are very, very important. Number one, not only does it define, right, the percentage or amount for assisting or representing a buyer. Okay, so it clearly puts everybody on the same page of what they're willing to pay as a concession. Okay, it gives you the authority. So if you get a PA that comes in that says, hey, I want 7% on the concession because I'm a dumb agent. Okay, that's fine. But you know that the seller is only going to pay 2.5. This authorizes you to be able to go back and say, hey, this isn't going to work, right? Like, I know this is a term we've pre-agreed to that we know isn't going to work. You need to drop that. And then line 17 is the big one, because it says if the seller, if shall, right? So if they select this one up here, which is funny because to me, you're only going to use this form if they shall offer compensation to cooperating brokers as a concession. And again, the language is a little bit weird, but that's where this concession piece, the seller's paying it directly. This form's only going to be used if they are paying it. But anyway, I digress. So the seller authorizes or does not authorize the broker to disclose the willingness to offer a concession. And this is where you get to have the conversation. So a seller says, well, I'd be willing to pay up to 3. But if we get multiple offers and, you know, some buyer's agent's willing to take none, or a buyer's willing to pay all of it, I don't want to tell them that I'm going to pay up to 3. We'll just deal with it on an individual offer basis. So you get 3 offers in, and one offer, they're relatively the same. One offer has 3%, you know, in the concession field. The other one has 0. Well, you just got away with an extra 3% because that buyer was willing to pay, or that agent was willing to work for free. I guess we don't know the situation in order to do that, all because we did not disclose the seller's willingness to offer concessions. And you could say maybe the willingness is, you know, via phone only. Maybe you're only gonna, you know, you're gonna call some agent and say, hey, just so you know, they're willing to pay up to, you know, 2% or whatever the number might be. you can disclose that, right? But then you need to know what that looks like, and it needs to be authorized by the seller. That's the key piece of this form, is knowing, do you have the right to authorize because you got to remember, this is the seller's money and they're instructing us what to do with it. Cooperating compensation is our money. We don't need their permission on what to do with our money. We can openly display, hey, we've agreed of our 6, I'm paying 2.5, and we've already signed and agreed and disclosed that with the seller in our listing contract. Therefore, we now have the option to continue to move forward and to disclose that, right? So that's where it gets a little different, because now this is not our money. This is somebody else's money. We need the authorization in order to disclose what's going to happen with that money. Okay. Similar to if somebody's going to offer a bonus, right? Well, the seller is going to offer a $5,000 bonus if we close before the end of the year. Super cool. We need that in writing because that's the seller's money that we're giving away. It doesn't affect our listing, our total brokerage compensation on our listing contract. Any questions here? Okay, cool. I feel like my head's going to explode anytime soon here. Okay. Here we go. Okay. So when we talk about a couple things, there's really basic ways of doing this. Okay. So number one is what I kind of call the old way, right? This is your cooperating compensation. If you're like, this sounds really, really confusing, I don't want to do any of this, that's totally cool. You don't have to. Go to your listing appointment, take it like you always have, figure out what you're going to keep and what you're going to offer out as part of the total brokerage compensation, and leave it alone. It's just that simple. Make sure you watch any PAs coming in, though, because if you don't issue the cooperating compensation form, we're going to have a problem. So make sure you're watching the PAs, specifically lines 405 and 408, to make sure you're not giving away money without advising your clients on the impact to them. Okay. So that's kind of the old way. You're looking for a little bit of a different way, right? So I go in and I do a listing presentation. And I say, here's my menu of services. Sellers, which one do you want? Brandon, we like you. We like what you're going to offer at 4%. Super cool. But we're not going to, we don't want you to pay the buyer's broker. We'll negotiate that in a PA. Sounds cool. Let's do that. But by the way, I need you to now tell me the addendum needs to be added to the list contract. I need to know, what are you willing to pay? What's the max you're willing to pay? And whether or not I have the right to share that with cooperating brokers or not. Those are the questions, right? So you fill out the addendum, you identify that, and away you go. Then we either advertise it or we don't, depending upon what the seller wants. I honestly, if you go this route, I feel like a seller is going to say, well, why would I advertise and give away more money if I don't have to? And frankly, I don't have a good argument, because you're negotiating against yourself, right? If somebody says they're going to list a property for 2%, you're kind of negotiating against yourself. And it's like, yeah, I guess we got to do it for 2, right? Or they're going to give 2. Why would I not ask for all of it, right? So, but if the seller says, well, I'd be willing to pay up to 2, 2.5, but if they're going to write an offer and it's less, why would I not do that? That's fair, right? That's very fair. So at that point in time, then that's where you would handle this section. You would not fill out lines 405 and 408 on the PA. In the space of making sure that if that's there, you have it all documented appropriately, right? Listing contract would be the 00, add the addendum, advertise it, and then making sure that the PA matches accordingly and doesn't supersede. So there's some different ways to look at that. And then lastly is kind of a hybrid, in that the reality is that it's looked the same forever. It doesn't change. It's just we're bringing the concession option to the forefront of the decision-making process. That's all we've done. It's always been in the back, is like, yep, that's something in the back seat that it's a tool we can pull out if we need to. And now instead of it being in the back seat, we're just bringing it to the front seat and saying, here are the options. How do you want to handle it? And that's really kind of the differential as we begin to move forward. Couple things. Katie made fun of me when we talked about this, but I said, hey, our recommendations, it can be as easy as 1, 2, or 3, right? Number 1, just offer a co-op. Go in, get your listing, figure out what you believe is a value add, and decide with the seller on cooperating compensation and do it that way, right? Offer 2 is kind of what I said, is just do a seller concession. Establish your value and then establish a limit that the seller is willing to pay on a concession, and allow the PA to drive and dictate the terms of that. And then, of course, option number 3 is do absolutely nothing, and the buyer can straight up ask in the PA, right? Because again, if you don't fill out the addendum on the listing contract, the PA comes in, That's the seller agreeing to terms that we don't have to preset. Is it helpful for us on a marketing angle to preset some terms? Absolutely. Is it a requirement? Not at all, right? So there's a lot of ways that we can handle those conversations as they begin to come in. These are our recommendations, trying to keep it simple, clean, and lean, but it is a little bit of a change because it just brings one more methodology to the table. So a couple things, our forms, again, are all set to match. We should have them available by September, hoping sooner. Updated forms will be available tomorrow for you. You'll see a 2024 Minnesota form available to you, so you will have that. And life will be good. You can begin to use them. You do not have to use the new forms if you don't want to. You can continue to use our listing contract as it stands until it gets updated and replaced. And you can continue to do that. You don't have to, you really don't have to change anything if you don't want to. You just need to be aware specifically on the buy side that lines 405 and 408 on the PA, you need to know when to use that and why to use it, and then how to explain it to a buyer or to a seller. On the buy side, it's going to be really easy because you'll already fill out the buyer agent compensation disclosure. You will have already had the question that says, how much is the buyer paying you directly versus what they're receiving from the seller or the seller's broker, right? So 405, whatever you put in that section needs to match the buyer agent compensation disclosure, which says a check mark from whatever percentage or dollar amount from the seller, right? So that's pretty simple. Seller or seller's broker, I think is what it says. And all right, so we already shared with you a little bit that the MLS is the enforcer. So that's unfortunate, but it is what it is. We will, inside of the MLS, you guys, so because we are displaying cooperating compensation, you can share a link in the private remarks that says, for more buyer broker information can be found at coldwellbankercrown.com, right? You can do that. And you can leave that in the agent remarks. What you cannot do is say more buyer broker information can be found at coldwellbankercrown.com/123 Main Street, right? Like you can't send it directly to the property. You can send it to the aggregate website. Now you can change your own language if you are displaying on your own website or whatever else you want to do. You want to use your agent website, right? So bjohnson.coldwellbankercrown.com, or maybe I have a specific domain set up. You can do that, but it must be the aggregate domain, not a listing specific domain. Compensation will be displayed on our website, as we've already talked about. Seller concessions will be displayed if authorized to, so that'll be forthcoming once we get the vendor to make the updates. This is kind of fun. There's no need to redo listing contracts unless you want to. We can still offer cooperating compensation. You are going to want to make sure that you have cooperating compensation forms ready to go for your listings, making sure that you have a good way to communicate them and share them. So that would be important. And yeah, so buyer rep contracts, if the amount you are receiving is less than the co-op, then an amendment or new contract needs to be done. So is less than the co-op, then an amendment or new contract needs to be done. Less than the co-op. I think that's backwards. Is that backwards? If the amount you're receiving is less than the co-op. Oh, got it. Yep. Sorry, I got that. Then the cooperating compensation, not what it says in the buyer rep contract. Sorry, we're good. Then that needs to be done. It took me a minute. I'm really sorry. Sorry, I don't know why I struggled with that, but I did. 50-50 splits. So in the event where me and Zach are working a deal and we get something put together, Zach's got a great listing. He's keeping 4%. He did a co-op of 2.5. So the full thing was, 6.5% is what he took it at. When it comes in, we are no longer going to say that we're going to take that 6.5 and we're going to split it. We're each going to get 3.1 or 3.12, 3.25. Sorry, let me do my math. Right, we're going to split it. That is gone. As of August 1st, that will be a dead thing in the water because it's just not fair because it's too much to manage and it's not fair to anybody at this point in time based upon the unilateral offers of compensation. Payments for single showings. This is coming up. Many people are like, hey, I just need you to open the door for my client. Would you be willing to do so? Blah, 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 blah. I don't like that. But if that's your business decision, that's fine. But you got to remember, as of the 17th, you can't show somebody a property that is not ours in the event that you do not have a written agreement on compensation and what to do with them. So it could be a facilitator agreement, which is fine. But however you're going to get paid to do that, just make sure that whatever comes in, it gets turned into the company, and then we pay you on your split, and away you go. Last thing, seller, this is a new one. So in the event that co-op, if there is an excessive amount of money lying around on the table due to agents, not doing their job well, the seller will keep any of the excess of the co-op. So this is a new thing that we talked about, and we felt this was the best way to honor our sellers. We've established our value at the listing contract of what we are getting paid. And if the co-op is there and it doesn't all go out because an agent had, 0% on their buyer or 000 on their buyer rep, and somehow we find out and we file it and we say, hey, we're not paying you. We can't pay you because your buyer rep says 000. Now all of a sudden we have 2.5% left at the closing table. That will just go back to the seller because it is an excessive amount, and we will not be keeping that in that space. So that's a little bit of the process. So that's what I got. I'm 11 minutes early, which is pretty solid. So any additional questions that are maybe meaningful? I'm ready. Yeah, Ashley.
I've got,
Oh,
sorry.
real quick, I just want to make sure I understand. So if it's our listing and you want to show your listing to someone, you don't technically have to, and you want someone to come, maybe you haven't worked with them yet, you're like in those beginning stages, you have not opened a door or whatever, brought them over the threshold. You're representing your seller at that time, and you don't need, because it's our listing. But if it's someone else's listing, then you definitely need the buyer rep or
That
some
is
type of
correct.
contract. Okay, I want to make
That is
sure.
correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
And it can be your listing. It could be Neil's listing. It could be, Parker is up in Bemidji. Like
Okay.
if it's a Coldwell Banker Crown listing, you have every right to show that to a buyer without needing any additional agreements in place. Yep.
Okay.
Good, Parker.
50-50 splits. So I have, understand that makes sense. As far as contracts that are already in the works as of now, will the 50-50 split still apply to those current transactions waiting to close in the next 3-4 weeks? Just need some clarification on that, because that would then affect my buyer's rep agreement and compensation disclosure I already have with those particular buyers.
Yeah, so great question, and I appreciate the clarity there. Anything that has been agreed to as of the date of the agreement will be honored on a 50-50.
Okay.
As of
Got
August 1, anything with an FA date after 8/1 will no longer honor that, because really it should be the 17th, but we decided the 1st because it's an easy date.
Sure.
But yes, anything still that was pending prior to will be honored the way on that 50-50. Yep.
Okay. Second comment I have, so as far as the broker compensation agreement, I feel confident in us using that. I feel also that when we get a couple weeks into this, we're probably, I just feel like in Bemidji, I'm not going to see that often. I'm going to see it more all on the PA. So on that 406 line, I believe is what it was. I believe, is that something you feel that way too by chance, or how does everyone else feel? Because I feel like that's what we're going to see way more. So you could see on our website, we'll pay 2.5 for something and we get an offer. We're not going to get that. Just like I'll have that disclosure ready for that particular buyer's agent, but I could see that not being signed or even used and pushed away and putting all of buyer's compensation just strictly on the PA. Is that something you think you'll see? What do you think of that?
Yeah, I would agree with that statement, and I think it's only because so many people aren't going to understand the process, and they're not going to get trained on the process, that they're going to go, well,
I
this
agree.
is the only way I think I'm going to get paid. And so I do believe that will become the normative behavior, just because people don't get trained, or they don't want to be trained, right?
Yep.
I was at one training in Cloud, and it was bad, you guys. The amount of people that were like, this is so dumb, I just want to sell real estate. And it's the reality is you can still sell it the exact same way. Like nothing has changed. You just have to get an agreement in writing on how you're going to get paid as the buyer's rep. That's it. So, but yes, I would agree. I do think it's all going to go into that space for sure.
Thank you.
I have one more.
Yeah.
And then you said all the pending deals you have that are not closing before the 17th, you recommend printing off that form and getting it signed. Because
Yeah, I would
that's the only way you're
say,
gonna get paid. Well,
yeah,
for sure.
I mean, again, you could contractually, it is recommended that you take a screen, and I appreciate this reminder. It is recommended that you do a printout of the MLS sheet or something like that on any of your pending deals. And I would probably start around the 12th, 13th, something like that. Just start taking a PDF or a screenshot of the co-op, because at that time, we're all still bound by unilateral compensation until August 17th. Right? So if it's in MLS at 2.5, 2.73, that's what we are agreeing to get paid, but we need something to prove that. And what we don't know is, what is the CDP or that North Star, the Common Data Platform, what is that database going to do? I have conflicting reports that says the values will still be there. And I have some people that say, no, it's going to be fully removed and that historical data will be lost. So I don't have a good answer on whether or not it'll be there, which is why it is our recommendation that you take screenshots of your cooperating or the MLS to make sure that that cooperating compensation is covered. Yep. Good. Thank you. Yeah, Vicky.
So the one screen, you said something about CBCR forms or under docs on Instanet.
Yep.
That's something we don't have access to yet, correct?
Correct. That is something that you guys, Fargo is working on. Yes. Any other questions? Katie, did I miss anything?
No, I think you got everything.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, so here's my last thing, my final minutes that I'm going to walk you through. And if you're like, don't hurt my brain anymore, that's totally fine. I do not have to hurt your brain anymore. Oh, you guys, there's a new, this is my ADD is kicking it. Check this out. There's a new screen inside of, look at that. That's kind of fun. Okay. That's way too nerdy for me. Okay, hold on here. Okay, so here's the deal. This particular form, so this is back on the listing contract. When and why would I ever want to fill out these lines? Okay, so we've gone through the whole ordeal. We had suggested that you take this and you add, 0 and 0. When we talk about the seller's obligation to pay broker's compensation as specified in line 119 shall be reduced by the amount paid up to or a percentage of the selling price. If you are looking for a really easy way, I shouldn't say easy, you got to know how to explain this. And you can all correct me and tell me I'm wrong here in a minute if I goof up here. But you could put in the amounts in here that are equivalent to what would go in the concession. But the tricky part is that it is only modifying the agreement between the seller and us. It does not modify the agreement between the broker and broker. Okay. So if let's just say for easy math, I'm going to put 6 in here and $3,500 because that's my fee. And it's a $0 retainer fee. Okay. Now, and I'm going to agree, I'm going to put up here, my co-op, I'm going to say is going to be 3%, and that's going to be on the next page of the listing contract. Seller says, well, that sounds fine, but what if this thing comes across in the purchase agreement, like you told me, Brandon, and we know that that's coming in there. You told me that it's additive, that it would be an additional expense on top of this 6. What do I do? Great question, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. Here's the deal. I can offer cooperating compensation. And if you want to address the concession question right up front, we can say that if the seller agrees to pay the buyer broker compensation directly to the buyer broker as identified in lines 405 to 408 in the PA, then Mr. and Mrs. Seller, your obligation to pay me my total compensation shall be reduced by that amount. And let's just say it'll be the same as what you said you'd be willing to offer as cooperating compensation. Now, this is when you get yourself into a little bit of a pickle, and why our recommendation is that you just do 0-0 and negotiate it when the deal comes in. In the event that you do this because the seller's pushy and they says, this doesn't make sense. I want this in here right now because if it comes in, I shouldn't have to pay you twice. That's exactly right. Now, if you get pushed, and this is how you fill this out, the scenario could go this way. We go out, we post our cooperating compensation form because it's at 3%. We post it on our website, an agent comes, they download the form, they sign it, they submit it with the offer. Oh, but by the way, they weren't really sure on how they did that. So they also put 3% in the PA because they weren't really sure how that was going to happen. Well, now all of a sudden you have a 3 and 3, you've agreed to pay 3%. The sellers agreed to pay 3%, and you've agreed to reduce your commission by 3%. So at the end of the day, if that was the scenario, how much do you get paid? 0. Okay. Now, the other side of the situation could, and it all happened just because it was a goof, right? It was just poor timing of the contracts that came into play. So that's if we post, cooperating compensation agreements out there just readily available, right? Which is our plan, as feedback from a lot of you said, yeah, that would be great if I don't have to constantly text or email it to somebody. So that's why we recommend putting 00 in lines 122 to 124. Now, you change your business practice and we go a different route, and the cooperating compensation agreement isn't signed, because we had 12 offers that came in and we didn't have time to get it all signed and everything else by the deadline of 5 p.m. Well, even though I've agreed to offer cooperating compensation, in the event that I don't have that agreement signed, but an offer comes in that says they want 3%, now how much am I keeping? Now I'm keeping 3% because that cooperating compensation agreement isn't signed. There is nothing that says Coldwell Banker Crown is paying ABC Realty 3%. Since that's gone, my total 6, but there's 3 in the PA, and I've already agreed in line 122 to 124 from the seller that if up to 3% comes in, it would be reduced from my obligation to pay, from the seller's obligation to pay what we agreed to on lines 119 to 120, which takes that 3% down. So now I keep 3. Did I blow anybody's brains yet? Okay, so like this is where it gets, there is a tool in when this will be meaningful, but you need to understand why and when you're doing it, which is why the simple answer and recommendation is to do 00. Negotiate it on the tail end. Don't worry about it on the front side. Negotiate it on the tail end. If you need to come back and modify your contract to honor what you guys have agreed to, then please come back and amend your listing contract. That's totally fine. That's the cleanest and easiest way to do that and still allow the opportunity to represent it. Now, if I felt like all 1.2 million of us real estate agents were super smart and we all understood these sections like really, really well, I would tell you this is the way you should do it. And don't worry about cooperating compensation. Just figure it out right here. However, I don't think that's how people are going to work on it, and I don't think they're going to fill out the PA appropriately. Parker, to your point, do I think it's going to always be in the PA? Yes, which is why I think eventually give it a year to whatever. And I've been saying this for a long time, you guys. I think buyers are going to pay buyers, sellers are going to pay sellers. We're one step closer to how that's done. We now just have another tool to pay the buyer's broker if the buyer doesn't have the money up front. So I don't mean to confuse you anymore, but I do want you to understand, and I told you I would tell you why you would ever fill these 3 lines out. That is a scenario in which you would do that, but that's why our recommendation moving forward is to say put 00 in these lines and negotiate it later. Now, I had one really smart agent say, if that's your recommendation, why did you leave those lines in the contract? Well, it's your business and we're just your business partner. Should you choose to run your model differently, you need to have the tools in order to do that. And we don't want to be the stopgap because of that. So that's why we left it in the form. But if you're wondering why, what, where, why, and when, this is our recommendation is to do it. Negotiate the compensation concession on the tail end of the deal, not on the front side of the listing contract. So that's my 2 cents there. I'm 2 minutes over. I'm going to hang around for questions or whatever else. Otherwise, you guys, I appreciate you taking time to learn a little bit about this. I understand that there's a lot here. We will send the recording and a copy of the slides out. Chris, I thank you for asking. And again, we are here for you, right? So if you got a question, you get stuck in a contract, call, text, let us know. what you need and when you need it. And we, by all means, we are here to help and make sure that you guys can go take your unfair share of the market. And I think we have a pretty good leg up on competition. So there it is. Happy Wednesday, my friends. End of July. August is coming, which is crazy. But here we go. So I will stick around. Bless you all. Thank you very much. Hope you have a great day.